Hey there. Hey Nancy. Hey Rick, can you hear okay? Is the sound okay? Hey Daniel, hey Michelle, hey Elizabeth. Hey Jill. Someone just let me know if you can hear. If sound is good. Sound is, Michelle says perfect. Everyone else can hear okay. Hey Kelly. Sound is good. Alright, so while everybody else is coming in, I do want to take a minute and just say um, I love the response that this video series is getting. If tons of people comment, which is wonderful, I enjoy the interaction. Also remember to like it because it allows me to reach more people, not just comment. So definitely feel free to comment, but like the video as well. It just allows me to expand my reach with people. Also, I do want to mention before we get into the meat of tonight's class that next month I'm doing my 2-day mediumship intensive. Um, so if you're, you know, not local, you have to do virtual. We're doing sort of these online classes, but it's a little bit different because I'm loosely using someone else's um, uh, book essentially as an outline and just sort of following through as to where when I do the 2-day intensive, one, instead of an hour once a week, it's like 5 to 6 hours a day for 2 days. So it's very intense and you're getting much more of a Travis-ified version of my philosophies, my beliefs, and my tools and techniques as far as the development of mediumship and spirit communication. So if you're interested in that, check out the details on my website. It's a Saturday and a Sunday. Very long days. It's very intense, but it's really fun. So go ahead and check that out. I also do have some appointments for the rest of February available, so check that out. I'm not doing the intensive online. I'm just doing these, the Monday videos for people who can't necessarily geographically access me. But if you are able to come to Ohio or local to the area, the in-person workshop it is available for you. So, Tammy will have to watch replay. That's okay, Tammy. I always leave these up. You can always come back to the archive. So, last week was a shorter class because I was a little bit under the weather still, and we were talking about psychometry. We were practicing psychometry. So since last week, has there been any questions about psychometry before we get into identity and evidence in mediumship? Any questions? Or it made sense, it was pretty good for everybody. We were all able to get something in regards to psychometry. I will take that as Jill says, I did it again in my development circle. No questions really. Seems really easy. Good. Denise, thank you. So tonight's class is primarily based in evidence, or at least was intended to be primarily based in evidence, but I am calling it identity and evidence because I kind of feel like there's a few other steps that weren't included. So while I find the book, To Touch the Soul, that we're sort of using as a resource great as a whole, I sort of feel like there's some gaps that I would have arranged maybe some of the approaches a little bit differently in order for us to get to talking about evidence. And so before we can even get into evidence and what evidence is in regards to mediumship, we have to learn to identify who's coming through. And I think that perhaps the author kind of put these two things together because sometimes identifying the communicator and getting evidence from the communicator can blend together. And what I mean by that is we have to sort of break things into steps with mediumship. So the first step is we have to learn to disconnect from the personal mind. And we do this through things like prayer and meditation. But part of disconnecting from the personal mind is learning to shift your awareness to spirit perceptions, learning to shift into that right brain, that alpha brainwave state where psychic experiences can take place. So we do this, as I said, through it's a raising of the vibration that takes place. And so the practice that you've been doing of sitting in the power and your daily prayer and meditation, those are sort of like the long-term, slow things that build our power steadily over time. And it's absolutely essential. But in a moment, when you're going about your day, it's a different mindset than I have to do this reading or I'm going to connect with spirit, so I have to shift a little bit. So how do we connect to the spirit world? How do we induce that shift? Well, if you've been doing the practices of sitting in the power and attuning to the spirit world and meditation, moving your awareness back to that state can sometimes be as simple as intention. And it becomes much more simple if you're sitting in those altered states for longer periods of time. But we all have to find ways where we can quickly access the spirit world. If we think of the spirit world like a frequency, which it is, then we're the radio. We have to learn how to tune into, 92.5 or 100.9 or 93.9 or whatever the station is that we're looking for, which is communication from spirit loved ones for our sitter. Hey Chris, hey Diane. So there's different ways that we can do that. When we sit and take a moment and ask our guide into our space, and hopefully by this point we recognize the calling card of our guide, that perception, because our guides are a little bit more close to our vibration naturally, because our souls recognize them, it automatically begins to shift us into spirit awareness. We become aware of our guide. It makes it much more easier to become aware of other spirit communicators. So if we have gotten quick and efficient at bringing our guide into our space, we're automatically moving ourselves into spirit awareness. The other thing too is you really kind of have to find what works for you. I know that when I first started doing readings, part of me shifting into the right mind space, the right mindset, was I would say a prayer. And my prayer was, I ask, pray, and affirm that all messages that come through me be accurate, valid, of the highest source of truth, and healing for everyone involved, including myself. That was my prayer. And the act of it, and obviously I've done it so much I don't even have to think about it anymore, the words themselves kind of just became a trigger, which is something that we're going to talk about as well. So at first it was the power of the words, then it was the repetitiveness of the action became the trigger to get me into the spirit sensitive mindset. Breath is always important. When we're going about our daily activities, we're not thinking about our breath. It's autonomous. It's part of the autonomy of our body systems. We don't have to think, breathe in, breathe out. When we become intentional in our breath and start taking deep, slow, intentional breaths, we begin to expand the aura and we begin to expand our awareness. So breath is really important. Sometimes just stopping and taking that breath, that deep intentional breath, is enough to help shift your awareness. The other thing is visualization. Visualization can be a very powerful tool in shifting our mindset and shifting our awareness. So I know some people, when they are shifting and attuning to the spirit world, they may visualize light coming down. Some people visualize, one of the ladies who used to be a sitter in my circle, she used to be on an elevator, and in her mind she would just see herself pushing the penthouse floor, and she would go up in the elevator as a way of lifting her awareness up to spirit. Some people imagine walking up a staircase. I know too, in addition to my prayer, I would always sort of visualize a door, which to me represented the door to spirit swinging open. And as I visualized the door to spirit swinging open, I knew that I was in the spirit perceptive mindset. Other people, it could be visualizing the pulling of a blind, or drawing back a curtain that represents the spirit world. One of the things that naturally happens when we connect with our breath, when we bring our spirit guide into our space, when we meditate, when we pray, is our aura expands. So naturally, as we go through the day, the aura is probably goes a couple feet out from the body, maybe about an arm's length out as a natural aura in just a healthy, average, everyday state. When we start opening up to the spirit world, we become more sensitive. Our vibration is raised. Our personal energy frequency is higher. Our energy expands outward. And that's what happens with mediumship, is the spirit communicators and our guides are in our space. They're in our vibration. They're standing in our aura. They're blending with us. That's what allows the transfer of thoughts that take place, which are the communications that get interpreted as pictures and feelings and words and sounds and memories and songs and things of that nature that the medium can communicate. So one thing that can be very helpful is imagining your aura or that light around your body, or kind of like when we sit in the power, that spark of the divine within you, expanding outward and becoming larger and having a much wider range or circumference that spirit can then step into and begin to influence us and begin to influence our mind. Jennifer Meyer says, how do you keep from bringing bad spirits through? There's no such thing as bad spirits. Other people will tell you otherwise. There's not. In the first class, I think it's either the first or the second class, I talk about why I don't teach and why I don't believe in psychic protection, because you're automatically coming from a fear-based place. Mediumship is based on love. Your loved ones, because they love you, are coming forward. And so if you're operating from a frequency of love, anything other than that which intends to operate from that frequency of love is not even a match to you. So as long as you're approaching it from a space knowing that you are God in a physical form and that you have nothing to be protected from, that is your natural protection. Val, if that's what works for you, that's what works for you. So visualizing, expanding the aura, prayer, breath, we're playing with the combination of those different things can absolutely, you just kind of have to figure that out for yourself and find which technique works best for me, which combination of techniques works best for me. That's just something that you have to play with. And so that's going to be one of your pieces of homework for this next week, is finding your way of sort of shifting your awareness. I can't see the entirety of your message, Elizabeth. She's receiving thoughts more clearly because they're in our space. Makes sense. Good. The other thing, too, is, as I've talked about, sometimes, over time, these things become triggers. Now, triggers are something that tend to often be talked about in hypnosis, and essentially going into meditation is a form of self-hypnosis. And so in hypnosis, oftentimes you program into the subconscious, which is where psychic information is filtered through, because good for you, Val. Jesus delivered you, wonderful. But that's not the topic of what we're talking about. So, spirit brings information to the superconscious, or what we might call the soul. And that moves through the subconscious and then trickles into the subconscious mind, which transfer those impressions, those thoughts, those frequencies into images, pictures, feelings, words, sounds, tastes, smells that we can understand. So in hypnosis, when someone is induced into a hypnotic state, a receptive state, an open state, then we can say something to the effect of, I want you to think of the color blue. And every time you want to access this state of consciousness, all you have to do is think of the color blue and you will be brought back to that state. So by being in a condition and creating an association with that condition, you can create a trigger that allows you to more quickly access that state of mind. So the next time you're in the power, you may program within yourself, or the next time you have a strong spirit link near you, you may program to yourself something as simple as, I'm in this energy, I'm in this state of mind, I'm crossing my fingers, or I'm touching my forehead, or I'm thinking of this particular color, and every time from this point forward, I cross my fingers, or touch my forehead, or think of this color, or think of this word, or say this command, or perform this action, I bring myself automatically back to this state open to our receptiveness. Val, you can either go away or I can block you. But we don't proselytize on this page, and we're not soliciting for Christ on this page. I'm a spiritualist, not a Christian. And that's not the debate. I'm not going to discuss it any further. You can just put up or shut up. With love. So, things that we do over time, bless you, things that we do over time can become a trigger. For me, I don't do the prayer anymore. When I read and I connect with spirit, I scribble on a pad. It helps me to get out of my left brain into my right brain. And so for me, sometimes just the act of sitting down and putting the pen to paper automatically, without me even having to think about it, has become a trigger that puts me in the right mindset. Visualizing my aura expanding outward creates this shift. And it's interesting. I believe it was John Holland where I first heard the term the quickening. And we can tell that there's a difference. There's a shift in vibration when the spirit world draws near, when we move our mind to it, that we can tangibly feel around us. For me, it's a change of atmosphere. It becomes almost thicker. And that's how you can really tell if you have the connection. When we are connected to spirit, when we have a link with our guide, when we are in that spirit perceptive mind state, things are going to speed up. Mediumship is an active process. And so I know a lot of people like to meditate for a long time before they do a message. They feel like they have to meditate and get relaxed and get in a receptive state. And yeah, that's great. However, mediumship is not passive. Meditation is passive, but live mediumship is active. And so sometimes if we meditate and allow ourselves to go really deep before trying to perform a spirit link, we can actually take ourselves too low and not register the spirit communications because the mind has become too passive. We have to be active because we are bringing spirit to life. We are giving their story life. We are essentially blending with them, becoming one with them to tell their story. And so if we're too passive, if we're too quiet, if we're too still, we can damper the communication. So we need to be active, and we need to learn how to access that state without, oh gosh, I have a reading, I have to meditate for a half an hour in order to make that happen. You don't have to do that. The shift can be instantaneous. And as mediums, we need to be able to move into that awareness at any time. If someone rings you up, hey, I had a client, I'm not able to connect with them, can you take them? You can't say, oh, well, give me a couple hours, I have to light some candles and light some incense, and then I have to meditate, and then I have to take a spiritual bath. You don't need all the ritual. If ritual helps you, that's fine, but if it becomes a crutch, then it's a hindrance and not a help. So we must learn to recognize that it's an active vibration, and it's just a very slight difference in perception. That's the difference between a non-mediumistic state and a mediumistic state. So, we are going to perform a connection. We've disconnected from the personal mind. We've shifted our awareness or brought our guide in, or sometimes just the act of shifting your awareness brings a guide in. But if you want to intentionally bring that guide in and look for the calling card, that can shift the awareness. Either way, we are finding how we connect with spirit. So once we've shifted our awareness to spirit perceptiveness, we then have to learn to identify who's coming through. We can't just say, I have a spirit here, they're telling me this. Well, how do I know that you didn't just pull that out of your ass? Because we have to give identity of who's coming through. We have to provide evidence to support the identity of who's coming through. So how do we identify who's coming through? Well, we're using our psychic channels of feeling, seeing, hearing, knowing. And so sometimes, a lot of the time actually, identity and evidence can be one and the same. But we still have to establish who's coming through, and then we can go into deeper forms of evidence. So let's just start with feeling. This feels like a grandmother. This feels like a mother. This feels like a father. This feels like a young person. This feels like an old person. How does it feel to you? You can feel, hopefully, maybe, depending on how your mediumship works, you may be able to feel the relationship. One thing that I will say in regards to feeling relationships is that spirit does not care at all about step, in-law, ex, or adopted. Your mother-in-law, your stepmother, your ex-mother-in-law, your godmother are all going to feel like a mother vibration. You get what I'm saying? So they don't care about that. So I don't ever just say, I have your mom here. I might say, I have a mother figure, and then give other things to help that person validate who that mother figure is, because it might be their stepmother or their godmother. So that's one way of going about that. And we can learn to train our bodies by putting ourselves, when we're doing our meditation and our attunement with spirit in our daily practice, and saying, okay, when I think about father energy, how do I feel the relationship of father? Do I feel the personality of my own dad? Do I feel masculine? Do I feel like a man? When I think of the concept of father, how do I feel it in my emotions, and how do I feel it in my body? And then notice, take notes, put it in the back of your mind. Then do the same thing with a father or a mother or a grandmother or aunt or uncle. Train yourself to build associations, feeling associations with relationships. So then, if you're feeling, what does this personality feel like? Personality is a big identifier, because if I said I have an old gentleman here, there could be 12 old gentlemen in that person's life, but I have an old gentleman here who is really, really grouchy. That might help narrow it down. Or I feel like this person was really a jokester and joked all the time, and they feel really funny and they made a lot of jokes. They'll be like, oh yeah, that's Uncle Bill. How does the personality feel? How do you feel in your body? So you recognize that there's a spirit communicator. You become aware of communication. Or you ask your guide to bring a soul in who wants to communicate. And as you feel that new soul come into your aura, ask them to come close. And as you sort of hold the intention of blending with them, how do you feel in your body? Do you feel tall? Do you feel short? Do you feel frail? Do you feel thick? Do you feel thin? Do you feel like you have long hair? Do you feel like you have facial hair? So physically, how do you feel characteristics as this soul is in your energy and in your aura? If you are visual, depending on how you receive your information, you may see a physical appearance in your mind's eye. You may see, I see a man with red hair. I see a woman who's wearing rain boots. I see a little child. You may see people in your own life who resemble or who have similar characteristics to the communicator. And then that's one of those things you have to play with. What is the connection? Is it that they physically look alike? Is it that their personalities are the same? Or maybe this person that I'm seeing is named Deborah, so maybe my communicator's name is Deborah. And that's one of the things that just takes trial and error. And you're going to get a lot of things wrong before you can figure out how it works for you specifically, so in the future you can move forward and start getting it right on more of a consistent basis. If you're looking at them, you may also see like initials or names. Some people, when it comes to names, maybe they hear the name, like with clairaudience, but maybe you can see the name written out. Or maybe you can ask for initials. And sometimes, for example, like with men, you might see TM, but depending on how you see it, might give you a sense of masculine or feminine. So perhaps you see TM in block letters, that may be more masculine. But if you see TM in scripty letters, it may have a more feminine vibe to you, and so that may give you a sense of gender. That being said, obviously when you're connecting with someone, you want to get a sense of gender. And you can use the sight or the feeling to determine that. So if you are feeling, most of us can usually feel this feels like a masculine energy, this feels like a feminine energy. But sometimes, especially today where things are more acceptable, like trans and non-binary, that can be a little confusing. So to me, you don't want to always say, I know for a fact that this is this, but this feels like a man, this feels like a woman, or this has a very masculine, this communicator is very masculine, this communicator is very feminine. If you are visual, you may simply ask or set up a system with your guides. If it's a male, show me blue. If it's a female, show me pink. I get that a lot, not with communicators, because I usually get a sense through feeling of the gender of the communicator. And, it's very easy to feel like, oh, this feels like a woman, this feels like a man, feels like an old woman, feels like a young man, whatever it may be. But oftentimes, if I am picking up on pregnancies, or spirit is talking about children that are yet to be born, or women who are pregnant and they don't yet know the gender, they will often show me pink or blue as simply a way of saying this is what you're going to get. However, that's another thing that we just kind of have to play with. Other things that you can use if you're, let's say, for example, more clairaudient. Do you hear? Do you hear in your mind's ear? Can you get a sound of the voice? Is it more of a masculine voice? Is it a feminine voice? Is it weak? Is it strong? Is there anything distinct about the voice? Maybe in your mind's eye you can hear that it was very husky, like the person was a smoker, or it was a very high-pitched voice. If you hear, again, you may hear a name, and you might simply say, okay, they're telling me Bob, I have Bob here. Although I will warn you, you don't always want to assume the name that you hear is the name of the communicator, but we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few weeks when we talk about delivering the messages. If you hear, what do you hear? For example, if you hear saws and hammers, maybe that person, maybe your communicator was a carpenter. And if you say, I have the gentleman here who was the carpenter, it may click immediately for the person that you're connecting with who it is. So this is where we start to see where identifying and evidence can blend into each other, because the things that come through that help you identify who the communicator is can also be evidential. And so, there's appearance, there's gender. Cause of death is another big one. And cause of death is usually something that most mediums feel. They'll feel issues with the heart, they'll feel drawn to a part of the body, or oftentimes, more often than not, we will be drawn to conditions of experiences that we knew, our own memories, when we're thinking or holding the intention of finding the cause of death. Because that's a big thing. I have a woman here who had breast cancer, and either we see someone who we knew that was sick with breast cancer as they were sick, or we feel a pain, or just we feel a hyper awareness of our chest. And sometimes physical conditions are something that we have to learn over time. For example, like if I know I'm communicating with someone who had an open heart surgery, I literally see a scar down the chest. But I know if I'm dealing with someone who had respiratory issues, I don't see anything per se, but I feel a heaviness in my lungs. So sometimes it just takes time to learn conditions. And in life, as we are around people and we experience conditions for ourselves, it becomes part of our symbolism and part of our memory bank, so to speak, that spirit can draw on and use to more efficiently identify physical issues that they had in life, or physical causes of death that we can use to identify, give evidence, and validate when we're doing any sort of message work. So, for example, people who are in the medical field will very easily be able to not only pick up on those physical conditions, but they can probably get really specific with those physical conditions because they're more familiar with it. So as to where maybe someone who doesn't have a lot of experience with medical might just say, I feel like this person had breathing issues. Someone who is in the medical field may be able to say, your dad's showing me that he had a pulmonary embolism in his left lung, and that it started with some circulation issues with his legs that were a result of diabetes. They could get specific like that. Yeah, we're definitely blocking Val here once we finish the live stream. So personality and behavior are absolutely helpful with identifying. Another thing that I think is important to look for are objects and places. If you are seeing objects that a person had, or if you're able to describe a place where a person lived, that can help you identify and also bring evidence through of who's communicating. I have an old woman here. I feel like she had some issues with her legs prior to her passing, where she had to use a wheelchair, and I'm also seeing this living room that's painted bright blue. Well, chances are they probably don't have multiple people in their life who were old women who were in a wheelchair who had a blue living room. So if you're able to add the element of the blue living room, or that they had the statue of an angel by the front door, that can also help identify who's coming through and also give a piece of evidence, because you've never met this person, you've never been to their house, you've never seen their blue living room. So how else could you know that unless they were bringing that through? Now, some people could argue and say that on a psychic level, you're just telepathically feeding back things that you're picking up from the aura and the mind and the memory of the client. But I would say if I saw a medium work and every single thing that they said was 100% right or immediately understood, I would question it. Because sometimes the best messages that come through are when like 90% of the things are hit on, but then 10% of the things people say I don't understand. Because oftentimes it's the 10% of the things that aren't understood where the person comes back later and said, I had to go and look and find this out, and you were right. Because that shows that it was coming from spirit and not just some psychic feedback loop from the client. Heather, I've submitted all of Al's comments. Thank you, Heather. I would do it now, but I'm afraid it'll disrupt the live stream. I'm just going to go back here. See if there's any questions so far that I may not have missed. Amber asked a really good question. She says, so should I not concern myself with trying to identify which side of the family they come from? That can be one thing that can be a helpful tool with identifying who's coming through. So it's what I call family tree method. And you may set up a system with your guides, or you may find that it naturally occurs this way, that as you begin to sense the communicator around you, or for me, sometimes I literally feel a location with the communicator. Sometimes it's by me, sometimes it's by the sitter. Other times it's about the direction that the information is coming into my awareness from. I get this picture from the left, I get this picture from the right, and sometimes left and right can be indicators of maternal and paternal sides with identifying who's coming through. So, for example, I usually don't work this way. It was more so when I was younger, and I would look for a communicator, and I would objectively see, I wouldn't see a body. I've never really seen bodies, apparitions, but to me I would see an energy to one side of the client or the other. And it would kind of look one of two ways. Sometimes it would just be like one side of the client would be brighter, lighter almost, or it would look like a heat wave on the highway, like a distortion of air. And then I would tune into it and get a sense of, does this feel male or female, or how do I break this down? How do I interpret this energy? But I would find that if I noticed it to the right of the client, it was usually their father's side of the family. And if I noticed it to the left of the client, it was usually the maternal side of the family. Now, some people say that it has to do with the polarity. So the idea that the non-dominant side, which for most people is the left-hand side, is receptive, it's feminine, that the right side energies are masculine, projective. And some people say that if the person is left-handed, it could be reversed. So you might ask, experiment with it. Try looking for information or feeling. You don't even have to see like the glow or whatever. Do I feel drawn to the left side or the right side of the person when I'm opening to spirit communication? And then as you give some details, even if you have to ask for future reference, so is this mom's side or dad's side, and see if there's a consistency that happens, you can kind of get a sense that way. Sometimes too, I noticed that how close I noticed them to the body of the person indicated like physical closeness or closeness of relation. So friends and like maybe schoolmates would be a little further away, as to where immediate family would be like right here. Oftentimes I would sense grandparents above or slightly behind the person, and that noticing the location of where they are around the sitter might be a good way for you to identify the relationship they have to the sitter. I don't work that way. I find that it doesn't work so great for me, but as far as basic left, right, maternal, paternal side, that worked for a while when I was younger. So you may find that it works that way where and you have to remember their right side and their left side is different from your right and left. So it might be flipped in your mind when you perceive it, that I'm sensing this person to, if I'm looking at the client and it's to my right, it would be their left. So keep that in mind. And sometimes spirit will just not be consistent, or sometimes the communicator just wants to buck the system and you have to play it by ear, but you always have to trust what you get, give what you get. And as long as there's other things, even if you misinterpret that, give other pieces of information to validate, the sitter's not going to care so much. They're just joy to hear from their loved one, and then you've learned something that you can file away and make you a better medium later on. Nicole, when do you allow clients to ask questions during your mediumship reading? So if we're just focusing on spirit communication, normally I just open up first and then I do the talking. If I need them to clarify something for me, which I have no qualms about, I know some old mediums are really strict about don't ask questions. For me, you're not going to learn if you don't ask questions, and we learn from doing. If we're just learning from theory and then we try to put everything into practice perfectly, we're going to fuck ourselves up. So for me, and I know that this is a bad habit, myself included, that a lot of American mediums make, is we ask in the form of a question. And I don't believe that there's anything wrong with asking questions. I don't believe that it's fishing as long as you state what you get first. So instead of, is your mom alive? I have a mother vibration here. Does that make sense to you? Or did someone in your family paint? Instead, to the sitter, I'm seeing like paint splatters and paint cans with this communicator. Does that make sense to you? Because you want to confirm pieces as you go to make sure you're on track, because sometimes what happens is another spirit communicator comes in and we think it's the same communicator, and then you're starting to get no from your clients, and then you start to feel those no's and you start to shut down, when in reality you were yes. You just had a different communicator and you assumed that it was all from the same communicator. So I don't believe there's anything wrong with asking questions as long as we state what we get first that inspires the question in the first place. But usually with mediumship, I'll communicate what I get, and then when I start to feel the connection fade, because you will usually feel the spirit person pull back, or that connection start to grow weaker, or the energy start to drop a little bit. When you feel yourself start to come out of the power, but I still have that connection, that's when I'll usually say they're pulling back, or I'm not able to sustain the link for much longer. Is there anything that you'd like me to ask or try to get? So hopefully that answers that question. That's another thing too that I want to bring up. There's this idea of, in the beginning, when we are first starting out, we want to start creating systems that work for us. And so that system can sometimes be putting into place sort of parameters that we would like our guides to have the communicators that are coming through comply to. So that may be, you might tell your guide, okay, when spirit communicators come through or you bring a communicator forward, please always have them identify themselves with their age, a name, and their cause of death, or a gender, an age, and a cause of death. And those are the three things that I always want to start with, and then we can explore and see where we go from there. And that's really wonderful at first. And it's wonderful even at later, not even just at first. However, we can't become so rigid in approach. We can't get in a stylistic rut that it becomes mechanical, because then we lose the presence of spirit, which is just as important as the evidence, because you can give a bunch of facts that all might be true, but if it doesn't have presence, if it doesn't have personality, if you're not bringing the energy of that soul to life, then it's empty and it's not as healing. Meanwhile, you have some who are just all feeling and they bring tons of personality in but no evidence, and that's just as not helpful. So we have to have a good balance of both. So part of, I think, being a good medium, and part of the always struggle that we're going to be striving towards, is finding this good balance between sort of having a checklist, having this system, asking this spirit person questions to keep conversation flowing, and having this natural, okay, come as close to my body, touch my body, come as close to my aura as I can and blend, and let me just speak the awareness of blending these two souls and blending this consciousness and being this person for a period of time. It needs to have a balance of both. It's a tricky thing. It's something that only time can teach us and experience can teach us. I say, and it's like if I just came up to you and just started asking you, met you at a bar, and just started asking you random question after question after question after question, where you started to feel like it was an interview, wouldn't it be a beautiful conversation? Meanwhile, if it was just, if it was just vapid, you probably wouldn't want to stick around either. So I say, use those questions, those checklists of, I want an age, I want a gender, I want a cause of death, I want a personality, but allow room for the presence to come in, and then let the evidence and the things that you take from the identifiers dictate where that goes, and just blend and speak that person into existence for your sitter. And then if you feel stuck in the communication, or if you feel like not much is happening, or maybe you get a communicator who's just naturally quiet, because our personalities can be contributing factors to how well a soul connects with the medium. A loud person who is someone very loud and boisterous in life is probably going to be very easy for a medium to connect with. A real shy person who it was like pulling teeth talking to them in life might still be like pulling teeth talking to them in death. So if you get one of those souls where it's just not flowing, then you can kind of fall back on those questions and asking questions to stimulate conversation, because it's a two-way street. Does that make sense? Jill asks a really good question. How can this work when you intentionally seek connection with a certain type of person? I always tell people, usually I'm pretty good when my mediumship is going good. Usually I'm pretty good at getting who you want to get. But at the end of the day, I cannot guarantee who comes through. And so I will say, let me just be open first and say who I have, and you can help me figure out who we have here. And then usually it's one of the communicators, or if maybe it is just one communicator they happen to pick up on, is who they're looking for, because they've been putting those signals out before they get to the medium. But sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes they sit down and they want to talk to Jolene, and I have Uncle Tom, and we've been talking to Uncle Tom, and they're like, well, that's really wonderful, that's really nice, and okay, I'll take into consideration what Uncle Tom has to say, but I really wanted to hear from Aunt Jolene. Then I'll say, okay, let me see if I can get Jolene on the line. And sometimes I can and sometimes I can't. And how I approach that is mentally I say to my guides, she wants to talk to Jolene. If Jolene is available, please go get her and bring her in. And as I'm waiting for them to bring Jolene in my mind I'm just thinking, Jolene, not to not to sound like Dolly Parton. Jolene, I'm just sort of repeating the name as like placing the call, and then I wait to feel the presence, and then if I feel the presence, then we can go from there, and if not, I simply have to say, I'm sorry, I'm not getting Jolene today. Maybe we can try for another time. So that's how I would approach that. Now, a lot of teachers teach that you stick with one communicator, you don't want to get a bunch of communicators, or that if you should really focus on one communicator at a time until you get more advanced, and then you can start to sort of bring in multiple communicators. For me, I don't think that's up to you. For me, one of the teachers who has really helped me a lot is Sharon Klingler, who's a Lilydale medium. And one thing that, a lot of English teachers, which English mediumship is wonderful and has really good things and some not so great things. Mediumship in America can have some really good habits and really not so good habits. I think a blending of both worlds is the best approach. One of my best teachers, Sharon Klingler, was very adamant with us when I did like, I've done tons of trainings and classes with her, but the one was a really intense platform class that I did with her, and she was very strict against not linking information together and assuming that it was all coming from the same source. So as to where, and I find that this approach serves me better in one-on-one sittings. I tend to find that following a thread works better for me with platform, but for now we're talking about one-on-one settings. So in a one-on-one setting, because usually if I'm doing platform, I just have one communicator per message. But in a private setting, I tend to get, it's like you open the door to one, you tend to get others that come in. So she was very strict that instead of saying, okay, I have a man here, I'm seeing that this man smoked cigarettes, he also collected knives, and he was a really good mechanic, and he loved hard-boiled eggs. Well, you felt a man, and then you saw knives, you felt mechanical energy, and then you saw and smelled hard-boiled eggs. And so you assumed that it was all the same communicator. But you know what they say about assumptions? It makes an ass out of you and me. So maybe you did have a man come in, and maybe that man was mechanical, and maybe you did see a flash of knives, and you did smell and taste hard-boiled eggs, but maybe the man who is mechanical is one communicator, and there's a separate communicator that's come in who collected knives and loved hard-boiled eggs. And so if you start to try give all of that to identify them at once and put them all together, they might be like, no, I don't understand that. But if you say, I have the energy of a man here, I know that I have someone who collected knives, I know that there's a communicator here who smelled and who loved hard-boiled eggs, and I'm also feeling mechanical energy, how does this make sense to you? Then your sitter can help you, and I don't believe there's anything wrong with this, and some people disagree and I say they can suck it. Then they can say, well, the mechanical person who was the older man is John, and my cousin Benny collected knives and he loved hard-boiled eggs. Now you have Benny and John here, and then in your mind you can say, okay, we're going to talk to John first. John, you step forward. We've talked to John. Okay, Benny, now you come forward. And then you can give two different messages instead of cutting the spirit world off at the legs. Does that make sense? So don't always assume that all of the pieces of information you get are from the same communicator. So I want to end with this little process. If you have a partner, I'm going to say, do this with your partner after the fact. Go back and do this each one at a time. One person goes through the process, delivers the message, then the other person goes and delivers the message. Don't try to sit and both go through the process at the same time and then share, because then you're holding on to things, you're doubting it, you're waiting, you're embellishing because it's sitting in your mind, you start adding your own stuff, you get in your own way. And mediumship needs to be live and in the moment. You're not getting downloaded and then sharing, you're live streaming. Mediumship needs to be live streamed versus downloaded. So, just listen to the process, and then part of your homework, in addition to finding which techniques work for you to allow you to connect, is learning to find evidence, practice getting a connection for another person and giving evidence. So what I'm going to have you do is just close your eyes. Take a few deep breaths. And I want you to, if you want to imagine your aura expanding, if you see yourself going up those stairs, you can say your prayer or your intention. But more importantly, I want you to just mentally ask, as you breathe deep and relax, your guide to move into your space. And you're going to look for that calling card like we've practiced in some previous weeks. Just become aware of your guide's uplifting vibration. And feel the love of the spirit world in your heart. Feel the light of the spirit world in your mind. And for whomever you're practicing with, I want you to just either hold the intention or ask of your guide to bring into your vibration or to extend your awareness to anyone for that person who is wanting to communicate. And just notice, like we practice with our guide meditations, any shifts of awareness, any additional presences that you may feel, or you may simply just notice a flow, a trickle of information begin to move into your awareness. But just breathe and let your awareness focus on that new source, that new presence, that new intelligence that's coming to your awareness. And I want you to open your mind's vision, your mind's eyes, and ask to be shown in some form or fashion the physical presence of your communicator. And just notice what you see. Just try to focus on visual for right now. Maybe you get a sense, some sort of visual distinction of masculine and feminine. Maybe you notice some sort of physical faces or body shapes or characteristics. As you are noticing the vision, is there any movement or action that's taking place? Ask the spirit communicator to show you any objects that may help validate or identify them. And just notice what comes to your mind. We don't have to understand it at this point. We're simply working on the perception of it. And give yourself permission to feel like you're making it up if you need to. Ask that spirit communicator to move as close to you as possible. And I want you to notice what you feel in your body. Are you drawn to any parts of your body? Do you feel any discomfort in any parts of your body? Maybe you feel like your body has changed. Maybe you feel like your stature is different. Maybe you feel like you want to carry yourself differently. Let spirit impress themselves on your physical body. And allow Spirit to share their emotions with you. And with their emotions, their personality. Do you get a sense of personality? Do you see illustrations of a particular type of personality? Do you feel happy or serious or silly or quiet or mean or joyous? Do you get a sense of any clothing that you might be wearing as you ask the Spirit communicator to blend with you? Now I want you to listen with your mind's ear to the spirit world. Let yourself perceive a word that's relevant to the communicator. Let yourself perceive the first sound that comes to mind, or a song. Maybe you hear a name. Challenge yourself to trust the first name that pops into your head. It doesn't have to be the name of the communicator. It just may be a name of someone connected to the communicator. It could be the name of a place. What's the first name that comes to your mind? Try to smell the spirit communicator. Can you smell their vocation? Maybe you smell the woodwork, or leather, or car oil. Maybe you smell cigarettes, or cologne, or perfume, or a specific type of food. As you ask this communicator to let you know them through your smell and your taste, what do you perceive? Blend with them. Let yourself stand in their shoes. Let your memory be their memory. Let your mind be their mind. Let your heart be their heart. What do you know about yourself as you blend with your spirit communicator? Are there any actions that you feel inspired to do, or movements that you feel inspired to make? Take one more look with vision and ask this communicator, ask your guide to help show you pieces of evidence about who this person is and what this person loved, what this person did, things this person owned, things this person wore. Just let yourself get one or two pieces of information. We don't have to get a ton. We just have to get a few good pieces. And right now we're only perceiving anyways. We're not doing message work. We're just working on noticing evidence and identity. Notice any last perceptions, even if they don't make sense. Thank your communicator. Thank your guide. And with your breath, begin to bring your awareness back to you, back to your chair. And I want you to take a couple minutes to write everything down before you forget. And if you're doing this on playback for a partner, speak everything that you perceived. Even if it sounds crazy, even if it doesn't make sense, even if they don't understand it. You are never wrong in your perception. You may be wrong in your interpretation, but you will never be wrong in your perception of spirit. So that's what I'm leaving you with tonight. Practice your tools for learning to find what works for you and shifting your awareness to spirit. And practice tuning in to a spirit person for someone and getting identifying factors and identifying evidence. So before we end tonight, do we have any questions about what we went over? To give just a couple more minutes in case anybody's typing their questions. You're welcome, you guys. Elizabeth, Amber, Denise. Other Denise. Both the Denises. Once again, I do have appointments available, a few more for the rest of the month. And then in March, if you're interested in the 2-day intensive, check it out. There's details on my website. Can we be too close to certain people? Absolutely. If we know too much about a person, then we're going to really we're going to find it hard to be objective, because am I perceiving this because this is what's coming through, or am I perceiving this because this is what I know or remember? That's why I would prefer any day of the week to read a perfect stranger than someone that I have a little bit of a relationship with. But, and that's why it's so hard to trust signs and messages from our own loved ones, because we can't be objective with it. But, I do thank you guys for sticking with it. It's interesting how we're, I think, on week 5 now, and each week the number gets a little bit lower of the people who are sticking it out, but we're just weeding out those who are serious about their development and those who aren't. So I do appreciate those who are sticking through. I promise you, I know that this sounds like a lot and it sounds like you'll never figure it out. You're always going to feel that way. It's normal. It's natural. I feel that way a lot. 10-15 years into it now, and but the one thing that I can say beyond a shadow of a doubt is it's worth it. It's worth it. It's a joy, it's a privilege, it's an honor, it's fulfilling in ways that I cannot describe. So thank you so much, and I'll see you next Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern.